Administrator Pekoski, Mr. Baumgartner, Mr. Johnson, again, I want to thank you all for being here this morning. The Office of Inspector General and the Government Accountability Office have both identified critical vulnerabilities in our aviation security system that have remained unresolved, and in some cases for years. Mr. Johnson, the report the GAO issued this past April warns, and I quote, "It is important that TSA make timely progress on formal mitigation solutions because in some cases, inspections findings represent system-wide vulnerabilities to commercial aviation that could result in potentially very serious consequences for TSA and the traveling public," end of quote. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is, Congressman.
Similarly, Mr. Baumgartner, you titled a section of your written testimony, quote, "Covert testing continues to reveal persistent and troubling problems," end of quote. And then you go on to say that reducing these vulnerabilities is critical to ensuring threat objects are not carried on board aircraft, and unauthorized individuals who want to cause harm cannot gain access to airports' secure areas. Such actions could cause catastrophic damage resulting in loss of life and property. Is that right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So, to me, these statements are like flashing red lights. And here's the key question. In your opinion, why are the vulnerabilities that could cause catastrophic damage or potentially serious consequences languishing at TSA without being resolved? Does the agency need more resources or personnel, or new processes or procedures, or a new sense of urgency? Any of you? Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things we noted was that it often took up to somewhere from 3, 4, 7 months for even the vulnerabilities to be assigned to someone to take a look at, to mitigate. And then they languished in the system for up to, in some cases, over a year to over 3 years. Part of the thing that needs to be done is that that security vulnerability management process that the administrator mentioned needs to have better controls in place to ensure that there are some timelines set, there are milestones, that there's some check-in to make sure that progress is being made. They were simply assigned there and lack of progress was made. As I mentioned, none of those 9 vulnerabilities identified by the inspections office have been resolved through that process. There was one that was closed, but it was outside of that process.
And so I guess you could term that organization, procedures, and a sense of urgency. Is that a fair statement?
It's a fair statement, but it's more so the need to have sustained management attention towards these issues. And as the administrator mentioned, his quarterly meetings and check-ins would help in that area.
Mr. Baumgartner, did you want to say something?
I would agree with Mr. Johnson on the technology development. It does take time. There's been some changes in priorities, and oftentimes we find there's insufficient evidence to support the changes that we've recommended.
But what do you mean by that? What do we mean that?
Well, if we ask for results-oriented changes, we oftentimes will not get the sufficient response from the agency that would close the recommendation. Mm-hmm. And all of this is happening, with the TSO issues and concerns we have with the retention and the training and hiring of TSO officers with an ever-increasing air travel system, which Mr. Pekoski mentioned in his statement, is scheduled to be very high this summer.
Now, Mr. Pekoski, I do, from my days with the Coast Guard, and a lot of people don't know it, I used to be the subcommittee chairman, and the transportation of the Coast Guard, and you were in the Coast Guard. And so I appreciate your leadership. You have been an outstanding leader. And I appreciate that you're making changes in the agency's approach in an effort to resolve these vulnerabilities. I hope that through continued oversight, we will see many of those vulnerabilities fully addressed. But I want to know that the focus you are bringing to closing these vulnerabilities and improving covert testing processes will not waver if you leave the agency. And what kind of assurances can we have of that?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your comments. And, sir, I am in a 5-year term as the TSA administrator, so I have no intention of leaving the agency. I intend to fully serve out my term, and I appreciate the Congress's support of that effort because I think leadership consistency in TSA is very important. Sir, one of the other things that I think is important to consider is that it's critical that we have systematic changes and systematic adjustments so that we don't repeat what we've heard from the IG and the GAO. And to do that, as you know, I published a TSA strategy with a lot of input from my TSA workforce and from our stakeholders. Following that, I published an administrator's intent. And these are designed to lay the groundwork in place to make some structural changes that I spoke of in my opening statement. So to hit your key areas in terms of what we might need, yes, resources. We need a significant investment in technology. We now have a capital investment plan for TSA that lays out our technology requirements over the entire future years Homeland Security plan. The structural changes, I mentioned that we're moving all of our covert testing into one office. That, to me, makes eminent good sense. I need to have one place that focuses on it, and I can assure you that we are going to do more covert testing. We already have over the course of time, and repeatable covert testing, so we can see if we make a change and do another covert test after that, how has that change been? Has it had the effect that we think? And the other one is process, and I think the process one is particularly critical. This requires senior leader focus all the time. And that's why I want to have at the administrator level those quarterly meetings to take a look at, hey, what is our risk this quarter? Has it changed from what we saw in the past? And then secondly, how are we allocating our covert testing resources and our internal resources to address the vulnerabilities that have been identified?
I'm going to close by saying this. My Democratic colleagues and I, we're joining in introducing the Covert Testing and Risk Mitigation Improvement Act this morning. This bill, gentlemen, which is also co-sponsored by Chairman Thompson, the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, would do two major things: codify procedures for covert testing and vulnerability mitigation recommended by GAO, and two, require TSA to track and report its progress in resolving security vulnerabilities identified through these covert tests as part of its annual budget submission. We need a laser focus on closing security gaps through which our enemies could attack us, and my legislation is intended to direct the attention of both TSA and the Congress to this critical task, and hopefully this will be helpful. With that, I now yield Mr. Heiss 5 minutes.